exciting show. What we're going to be talking about is the 3 Mile Island. It is a disaster happened on 3 Mile Island. And the only things separating it from these family homes was the water of the Susquehanna River and railroad tracks. So it was fairly close to these neighborhoods. This was considered a perfect place for a nuclear power plant to be built because the river is what helps supply cooling needs to the plant. It was on one of 3 islands that spanned across 3 miles, and that's where it got its name, 3 Mile Island. This was a major fixture for this community. People can look out their windows and see, the smokestacks in the distance. The towers, were roughly 375 feet high. Not towers, but the smokestacks, the steam stacks to be exact. And these people, every day saw this power plant nonstop. So at this time, no one had any idea what nuclear power was. And nuclear power was brand new nationwide and was being promoted as the next big thing and the promise of tomorrow. This caused the community to look forward to the industry being in their backyards. They thought it was represented as a progress in the right direction for their city. This was a breath of fresh air because Middletown was really feeling the negative impacts from the coal and steel industries. It was dying out. They knew that it was going to bring a lot of jobs to their area, and it was a plus that the employees would get paid really well compared to others in the area. Unfortunately, they had no idea about radiation or the dangers that it can entail. An old documentary explains a nuclear power plant as a nuclear power plant is just a really big tea kettle. Nuclear fuel and a chain reaction process produces heat. The heat turns into water to steam, and the steam moves turbines. The turbines then produce electricity. So all nuclear power plants are designed to keep a reactor cool. It is said that there was a mindset throughout the industry because if an accident would introduce itself, the operators could just grab their things and leave. They were under the assumption that everything would be okay. Now, what happened in 3 Mile Island? 3 Mile Island power plant on March 28th, 1979 at 4 o'clock in the morning. It actually started. It was said to be the worst nuclear accident to ever happen on American soil. So exhausted operators were trying to finish up their shift. The 4 a.m. shift was considered one of the worst shifts to work because they're tired, they're exhausted, they just want to go home at that time. In the Unit 2 reactor control room, all of a sudden, alarms start going off all at the same time. What ended up happening is there was a turbine trip, and all of a sudden, reactor 2 was offline. They were under the assumption that the reactor coolant pumps were up and running, and, they thought, okay, it will fix itself. Now, all of a sudden, they quickly realized that they were not getting any emergency feed water to the reactor. So what that means is that the water that cools down the reactor, because the reactor gets extremely hot, was not getting to the reactor core. So if you look at this picture here, it's a little GIF. You can kind of see let it restart again, and then I can kind of talk about it. It takes a moment. Come on. There it goes. So it heats up. The water actually cools the lines. So you can see the red going through the water. It cools the lines. What ends up happening is that water was not reaching the reactor. So the heat in the reactor was starting to rise, even though the pressurizer stated that it was getting full. They were then attempted to shut down the reactor cooling pumps that was making water levels go up, because it was stating that the water levels were going up, but they weren't. It was very obvious to these operators were never fully trained on something like this occurring. It was said that they were under the mindset throughout the industry, if an accident happens, they could leave, as stated before. They wholeheartedly thought nuclear power was safe. These operators were absolutely clueless in what they were doing and what was going on, and they were frightened, to say the least. Hello there. How are you doing tonight, Stacy? STC Bush. So, they were trying to figure out what was going on for over an hour before they called Dick Double. He was the supervisor of radiation protection and chemistry. And he stated that he got a phone call around 5 a.m. that the Unit 2 reactor core shut down. The duty superintendent called him to the plant right away. Now, Dick worked for at 3 Mile Island since Unit 1 opened up in 1974. So, Unit 2 was only operating for 3 months at this time. It was only operating from December 1978 to March 1979. So this is a fairly new reactor. This is, stuff like this should not have been occurring on this, to say the least. So Dick really didn't know what he was going to be walking into. When he walked into the Unit 2 control room at 5:32 a.m., he stated that the operators were just trying to analyze the flows, the pressures, the temperatures, everything for the reactor 2. The major concern that they had was why there was no fresh water flowing through the system. Finally, right before 2 hours after the incident started, the on-call shift supervisor realized that a relief valve was open and leaking. So what ends up happening, we'll go back to this other slide right here. If you look at the thing that looks like a little water bottle that is under, it's kind of orangish. I can't really point at it for you guys, unfortunately. You see how it just blew and steam came out of it? What ended up happening is this valve right here ended up blowing, and the steam was continuously going out of the valve. Well, hello there, Mad Nines. Not much, we just kind of started. So because steam was coming out, the fresh water that was going and helping the nuclear reactor circulate was actually, completely going away. They weren't seeing new water come in, and the water that was in there was heating up and steaming out. So at one point, the relief valve did open to release the pressure. It ended up getting stuck open. So this didn't allow water to circulate inside the core, as we just stated. At 5:58 a.m., the operators decided to shut the valve and focus on the reactor. This actually probably was the first thing that stopped the incident from catastrophe. There's several different, aspects in this timeline that could have caused things to be a lot worse than it was, and this is just the first one. So at this time, they were running into the issue of the reactor considered superheating. If the temperatures continue to increase, the core will melt and create a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. and this would be extremely radioactive and extremely dangerous. So the water around the reactor was just sitting there and heating up, causing it to evaporate into steam. The biggest thing that could cause the int to spiral out of control is if the water levels dropped below the core. Thank you so much for the biddies. I appreciate it. So they were really, really looking at this because what this means is it could cause a possible explosion of the reactor. An explosion like that could be significant for, the American citizens. So the operators were completely in uncharted territory. They were not expecting something like this to occur. They believed that nuclear power was safe and that they thought that no major accidents would ever, ever, ever happen. Little were they wrong. Thank you so much for the biddies. I appreciate it. So, at this point, it was safe to say that one of the biggest reasons for 3 Mile Island disaster was because of the operator errors. I don't think that they were necessarily trained up on what they were supposed to be doing. Or they were trained up to a certain extent and they didn't want things to be leaked out to the regular public on how thank you so much, how unsafe this could be. So they had a lot of things going on at this moment. So at this point, the operators were completely unaware that the plant was experiencing loss of coolant, and they ultimately exacerbated or made things worse by following these steps. At this point, it was safe to say that one of the reasons for 3 Mile Island was for the malfunctions of instruments, as well as operator error. So temperatures were skyrocketing inside the reactor vessel, which started a partial meltdown. And at 6:57 a.m., a reaction alarm started to go off within Unit 2 control room. Now, Dick Doubles, the one that I showed you earlier, stated on the Netflix Meltdown 3 Mile Island documentary, I immediately went down to the hallway towards the reactor building. 2 technicians accompanied me so we could get in and find out what was going on. So as they were rushing to the reactor building, they got into the fuel handling building, which is what it was actually called. They are about 200 feet from the reactor containment, and they were able to identify easily what was causing the radiation. They weren't able to identify easily what was causing the radiation, but they quickly realized that there was an increase on their meters. So what they ended up doing is they placed the reader, because it has a long stick, they placed it up in the air over some piping, and they realized that the overhead unshielded sample lines that were coming from the Unit 2 reactor were extremely radioactive. We will get into that. We will get into that, Mad Nines. This is going to be a several-part documentary because there's so much information on it. And we will definitely... You'll have to see what ended up happening. So Dick realized after receiving these readings that there were major problems with Unit 2 reactor. They quickly left the area, and one of the technicians decided that he was going to split off and go into the auxiliary building of Unit 2 to clear it out because they were too close for comfort. I'm going to go ahead and play our first video. So this is what, from WITF News, and this is what caused the accident at 3 Mile Island. And here's is a look at what happened over the first couple hours. So let's go ahead and watch that video.
So what actually caused the accident at TMI? A pump that sent water to the reactor steam generators and removes heat from the reactor core malfunctioned. The plant's reactor shut itself down in response. Immediately, the pressure in the nuclear piping portion of the plant began to increase. In order to control that pressure, a relief valve opened and stuck open. Instruments in the control room, however, indicated to the plant operators that the valve was closed. As a result, the plant staff was unaware that cooling water in the form of steam was pouring out of the stuck-open valve. As alarms rang and warning lights flashed, the operators did not realize that the plant was experiencing a loss of coolant accident. Unaware of the stuck-open relief valve and unable to tell if the core was covered with cooling water, the staff took a series of actions that uncovered the core. Without the reactor coolant pump circulating water and with the primary system starved of emergency cooling water, the water level in the pressure vessel dropped and the core overheated. In other words, the core of the Unit 2 reactor at 3 Mile Island had begun melting. The relief valve stayed open for more than 2 hours. As all this was happening, what were described as trace amounts of radioactive gases escaped into the atmosphere in the form of steam, and radioactive water spilled into a containment building. The accident at 3 Mile Island had just begun.
Isn't that absolutely nuts? Well, you need to start eating. That's what you need to do. So, obviously, word spread. Very, very quickly. And before people knew it, there was tons of different, radio stations, media outlets, everything. Love the emotes. I love them. I appreciate it. So this is Paul Critchlow. He is the press secretary at the time, and he received a call from Dick Thornburgh, who was the governor of Pennsylvania, and he advised that there was a site emergency at 3 Mile Island. During the documentary of Netflix's Meltdown, 3 Mile Island, he expressed that he had absolutely no idea what 3 Mile Island was before the disaster. So you can definitely tell that this was not something that was... nuclear power wasn't really talked about. Nuclear power was kind of let on the low, in a sense. They didn't want people to really understand the whole picture of nuclear power because of different reasons, and we'll get into those reasons later on. So there was very, very little information that was given out regarding the incident at this time. The government officials started to make calls to Metropolitan Edison, who was one of the owners, and they were asking what happened. What does this mean to the residents and the American public? So they explained that everything was generally stable and nothing extremely serious was occurring. They were not giving out much information at all. All they pretty much said was, trust us. We know what we're doing and we have things under control. That's pretty much what they said. So at 10:55 a.m., Lieutenant Governor Bill Scranton held a press conference and stated the following. The Metropolitan Edison Company has informed us that there has been an incident at 3 Mile Island, Unit Number 2, and everything is under control. There is and was no danger to the public health and safety. Metropolitan Edison has been monitoring the air in the vicinity of the plant constantly since the accident, and no increase in normal radiation levels have been detected. So reporters had tons and tons of questions. Well, how do you determine the radiation levels? Or how could you tell which areas are contaminated and which areas are safe? But unfortunately, they were only giving out information that they knew, which was practically nothing. Bill Thornside, a nuclear engineer, of the DER, was called to answer these type of questions, and he informed the media that MET-Ed, which is the short term for Metropolitan Edison, quickly sent trained professionals out to the plant, and they were also in the neighboring towns and also in a town about 5 miles away called Goldsboro to take readings. So the wind was blowing towards that direction. So that's why they thought it was a good idea to get readings of that area. And Bill was the first person to inform the government officials and the media that small amounts of radioactive iodine was detected on the ground. You think that the Bill was talking a foreign language to all these reporters of the media because they had absolutely no idea what radioactive iodine was or the effects that it could cause on the communities. And this really caused some major questions. They were asking them, that's for sure. Thank you so much for the biddies. I appreciate you. So this also really, really, really pissed off government officials as well, because they just announced that there was nothing to worry about and MET-Ed has everything under control, and then Bill gets up there to speak to the media and informs them of this information. So they were very thrown back from the information because they trusted MET-Ed. Thank you so much for those biddies. I appreciate you guys so much. I appreciate it. So the community went on with their day. Children were going to schools. Everyone was going to work. They were just living their life like they would normally do. You don't know how to give them. You don't need to give those, Mom. It's fine. It was said that owners of 3 Mile Island were truly just trying to prevent certain information from leaking out to the public so they could cover things up and not cause mass hysteria. So look at those biddies. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me Bell. Oh, actually, that's a Harley. That's a corgi. Yeah, I think that's what. So, China syndrome came out right around this time, only 12 days before the accident. Oh my gosh, Mad Nines, thank you so much for the 500 biddies. You guys seriously don't have to give them. So I'm going to kind of discuss what China syndrome is, and it was a movie that came out regarding a nuclear power plant. And what it was is it was a thriller drama, and it had a news reporter and her cameraman that was witnessing an incident that was having to do with an emergency shutdown to occur in a nuclear power plant in California. You guys are so funny. A crew member suspected that the plant was violating safety standards and attempted to bring this attention to the public and media before it would happen again. The movie was predicting the events that were going on at 3 Mile Island. It really made people have an eerie feeling. During the movie, they referred this to the China syndrome. So that's why they get China syndrome. Obviously, it's just a core meltdown. So they said in the movie that it could render the area of the size of state of Pennsylvania permanently and make it inhabitable. So this was kind of weird that they were talking about a reactor plant, a nuclear power plant, going ahead and having a meltdown that could potentially leave the size of Pennsylvania completely inhabitable. So it was really eerie at the time. So it did start to open people's eyes. Thank you so much for the bitties. I appreciate you guys. Once they saw the movie, they started putting 2 and 2 together. And they understood the concept of a nuclear core meltdown. And they realized that the reactor that was right in their backyard could potentially be unstable. So the nuclear industry was trying to claim that it was fictional and they could never happen. And then bam, 12 days later, people realized that it could happen. So what we're going to be talking about next is questioning Med-Ed. So Med-Ed's vice president, Jack Herbin, was claiming that the plant was completely safe and working adequately. And he was also informing people that people were checking for radiation levels by sensitive instruments, and everything was under control. Radiation was recorded at this time over 16 miles away from the plant, and they were still insisting that everything was okay and levels were not high enough to be a threat to anyone's health. They did state, though, that there was a possibility of dangerous levels reading at the power's north gate. So what doesn't make sense to me personally is okay, you're receiving radioactive gases 16 miles away. That means that the plant itself is pushing out enough radioactive gases to make it that far, in my opinion. You won't make it old? Hold on. I think I... Oh my gosh. You could take care of them. You could take them, Mad Nines. Just kidding. But, yeah, so... they were... Oh, hush. So, in my opinion, this is complete bullshit. Complete bullshit. So, when news outlets started to ask questions to him, he informed outlets that they didn't think that there was any delays in notifying anyone of the situation, and that they don't think that the general public wasn't put in any danger at any point. Did they really? I did not know that. I have to look this up. Oh, shut up. Shut up. Oh my goodness. You know what? I'm going to time you out. So, we're going to go ahead and we're going to watch a little snippet of the... We're going to go ahead and watch a snippet of the interview that he was giving at this time. So it was 1 p.m. And this is also from What in the Fuck News. WITF News. And let's go ahead and watch.
About 4 o'clock, when there was a problem with the secondary side of the plant, we lost our 2 main feed pumps. When that occurred, the reactor tripped on high pressure. Following that, the safety systems actuated, and we injected water a good bit into the reactor coolant system, and this is normal. That's the way those systems are supposed to function. We think right now, as I've indicated, that the plant's in a safe condition. About 4 o'clock, when
most definitely
problem with the secondary side.
And we'll get into more later. I want to say so much right now because, like I said, there is a lot of information on this specific topic. I want to give so much out, and I want to explain my feelings on it, but I can't. I have to wait. I have to go in order of everything because there is so much things that happen. So, so right after this, around 1:50 p.m., there was a loud thud and lights started flickering inside the control room. The pressure spiked in the containment building and it went up really quickly and then straight back down again. So what this means is the instrument showed it go up, down, and then go back to normal. So operators didn't have any clue what was going on or what was happening, of course. And their first reaction was to see if the operating equipment inside the containment unit, was failing or already failed. And the instruments were advising that everything was running normal. So they moved on. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll have to look it up. So, around 2:50 p.m., it was said that the radioactivity was reaching the control room. So, radioactive alarms started going off, and employees quickly put on respirator masks to prevent breathing in the radiation. Dick Double stated that during this time, the main thing running through his mind was the possibility of exposing the public to radiation because they had absolutely no idea. Again, and you'll hear me say this 100 trillion million times during the series, they had absolutely no idea what was going on. They had absolutely no idea how much radiation was, going to or was getting to these people at this time. Eventually, government officials sat down with MedEd officials, and Jack Herbin, the vice president that had that meeting before. Oh my God. Who? Richard Head? Dick Double. Shut up. And MetEd stated that there was radioactive material being released into the air. So they finally admitted it to government officials. They stated that the government officials was starting to question MetEd on why they did not update them with this news. And Mr. Herbin advised that no one asked him about it. So he didn't release the information to them. At that moment, government officials knew that they could not have MedEd as a reliable source. Oh my goodness. So, Bill Scrouton, the lieutenant governor, had another press briefing at 4:34 p.m. and he stated, "This is an update on the incident at 3 Mile Island Nuclear Power Plant today. The situation's more complex than the company first led us to believe." Media soon began releasing that MedEd officials were insisting that it was not a serious accident, but were admitting radiation was leaking into the environment. At 8 o'clock p.m., employees in the control room were working diligently to get the reactor stable. At this time, they were finally able to take off their reactor masks, and it took a lot of time to make sure by measuring with equipment and instruments before they felt comfortable in doing so. They would need to get one or more of the reactor cooling pumps back in service. Reactor cooling pumps were the main source of recirculating the fresh water to the core. There was definitely a fear that it could possibly destroy the pumps in the process, and it was possible that starting reactor cooling pumps would cause more damage than if they just left it alone. So what they did is they set up a test by allowing one pump to be turned on, forcing flowing water to the core. And thankfully, the pressures went back to normal levels, and it completely stopped the devastation that was occurring at the time. So again, we already had one thing that could have caused devastation. Now we have number two. They fixed these operators. Granted, yes, they had no idea that something like this could occur, and they didn't have proper training, but they did everything in their power to make sure that they would try not to have a complete disaster more than it was already. So by the evening of March 8th or 28th, 1979, the NRC had put on a mobile lab on site to keep track of radiation content in the environment. And they had a total of 11 people on staff. And we're going to go ahead and watch, this one. So let's go ahead and see a little bit into the mobile lab that they had on site.
Don Berry, trailer 13. Don Berry, trailer 13.
They were clearing out some land for, different helicopters. They had different buildings. They had, they were definitely a lot of things. So the NRC is actually the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
No one is certain how long Trailer City will exist here behind the observation center at 3 Mile Island. But indications from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission are that work at the crippled reactor will be ongoing for months. Kirk Wilson, News 21.
So, like I said, there's so much stuff that I want to talk about right now and I can't. So, we're going to move on to Walter was the president of MED, and he advised reporters that evening the following: the radiation levels outside the plant have been very low level. It is certainly not endangered to any people in the area. Not at all. Keep that in mind. We have 72 nuclear reactors in operation in this country. They've been in operation, some of them since 1974, and we still haven't injured one single member of the public. And I think that's significant. There has been no technology that man has ever been involved with since the first time he started to use fire that can clean any record like that. Exactly. I can't even wait to get into all of that. So, this is when Ed Hauser was brought in. He was the supervisor of chemistry, and he had been there at the plant for over 30 hours. They had no idea the condition of the fuel was in, of the core. So what they would have to do is they would have to have a boron sample pulled from the fuel of the core itself. And boron is said to control the reaction that was in the reactor vessel itself. So it's taking a sample of that would let them know whether or not there was enough boron in the system to be able to safely shut down the reactor completely. So at this time, they weren't even sure if they could shut the reactor down. No one was asked to volunteer for the job to taking the sample, but Ed stepped up to the plate because he knew what needed to be done. The biggest concern that they had was making sure that the employees that went in to get the sample had no unnecessary radiation exposure. And this was something that was extremely difficult to do. These men had families, and they had to go home too. So it was pretty scary to think about having to go in there with all of this radioactive. Gabe want me to ask you what you say the most with date. What? What is that supposed to mean? The team had already everything pre-planned out, so they were going to go in there and do it once. They got into the chemistry laboratory they were going to go into the fuel handling building. They wanted no wasted time. They wanted these employees to be in and out as quickly as, oh my goodness, be in and out as quickly as possible. When Ed Hauser and a small team went into the room, they saw incomplete reports spread around, food and drink cups sitting around. And he explained it like the rapture took place. Everything was left the way it was when employees rushed out of the building. So, the telecator that Ed had with him was going up extremely high. And it's a portable battery-powered dose rate measuring device, which is suitable for measuring gamma and X-rays. It was also used to detecting beta radiation as well. So again, they decided they wanted to go in, grab the sample that was needed very quickly and safely as possible, and then get out. He explained that he became extremely contaminated. On a weekly basis, you were supposed to only be able to be allowed 0.3 rem of radiation, and Ed was reading at a 2.8 rem after retrieving the sample. So it was almost over 100 times what you were allowed to have. He said he spent hours in the shower trying to get rid of the contamination, but it didn't work. He was still contaminated when he went home. And he's had so much fear that he wouldn't even touch his kids. He was afraid to expose them. And unfortunately, he still gets emotional about it today. Kinda, yeah. Are you talking back there? Are you talking to your mommy? So, unfortunately, it was just a guess how much he really was exposed to, because they really couldn't pinpoint 100% that that's what he had. But that's what they were, thinking, that he had 2.8 rems. And he really risked his life to save millions of people. And he did it completely willingly. So I have mad respect for him. Redeem Scaleway. So his sample confirmed that boron was extremely low. This meant that the plant was not at a stable condition, and Unit 2 was not cooling down as fast as it normally would be expected. So you got scaled? So we're moving on to conflicting information. This is when locals really found out that this was an extremely dangerous thing happening over there. They were getting conflicting information each and every time they turned. They were getting one thing from the government officials and another thing from Ed, explaining, Ed was trying to sit there and say that everything was fine, nothing was going to happen. You're waiting for a jump scare? You're mean. Just trust them, okay? Everything, they got this. They know what they're doing, because they've been through this before, right? So journalists across the world were showing up in Middletown to get the latest on Unit 2 disaster. It was the most media coverage in the small town has ever seen, and journalists soon were feeling the same way locals were. Everyone thought that they were not being told the truth, or at least the full truth regarding the disaster. By the second they knew, these press conferences were more so completely crap, and journalists were questioning if the issue was occurring in Unit 2 was anything like China Syndrome, so the movie that we were talking about before. During another MED press conference, MED's president and vice president were claiming that they do not have a China Syndrome on their hands, and there were absolutely no possibility for that to occur. When asked if they believed that the reactor has been uncovered, they stated that they were unsure. So we're going to actually watch that press conference right here. Again, from WITF News.
And as far as the 22 major safety problems, I really couldn't speak to that directly.
During this, I'll be right back.
We were evaluated in 1976, along with a number of other reactors. We came out with a B rating right in the middle. We had some inspection discrepancies and infractions, just as other plants did. We've also had incident reports where equipment has malfunctioned, and we've made our prompt reports just like other reactors.
How many times has been down since the one online? 4 times?
It might be 3 or 4 that were up. That were no, I wouldn't say that they were for safety problems. We've had some difficulty with our governor valves on the turbine. We've had some oil leaks. I think at one point we dropped the control rod. We've had some condenser leaks, but again, nothing that's out of the ordinary.
The heart of the problem seems to be why did radiation, why was it allowed to escape into the atmosphere? That seems to be what frightens the public the most. And why should the public believe that something like this would not happen again to possibly a more serious magnitude if there was a bigger breakdown?
Well, radiation is allowed to be released from the reactor plant in the course of normal operation. That's done on a daily basis. There's low-level gas released. There are low-level liquids released to the Susquehanna after careful monitor and analysis. Also, our ventilation systems discharge trace amounts of radiation to the environment on a daily basis. At this point, because of the failed fuel, we discharged more than the trace amounts that we typically do.
Mr. Herman, are there any safety problems? You were asked about 22 safety problems. What safety problems are there?
Well, at this point, if there are any, we really haven't identified them in depth. Now, there will be a very careful study made of all the events leading up to the difficulties which we've experienced over the past 2 days. That report then, in turn, will be reviewed extensively by a peer group. And
Excuse me, you're not answering the question. The question is, are there any safety defects at this plant?
not to the best of my knowledge.
And may I also partly respond to that? If there would be any safety defects, ask the NRC. I am sure they would take action to see to it that those things are immediately corrected, or the plant would be shut down.
I want to make a comment right now, right before we continue watching this. So the NRC is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they regulate commercial nuclear power plants and other sources of nuclear materials. So just keep that in mind. So they're pro-nuclear.
What you've learned so
No
far?
safety problems with this plant at all. No safety problems at all that this company knows of today or in the past.
Oh, I can't identify any.
Not that we can identify, no.
Does that mean that you're confirming it must be human error?
No, I don't think
You
we're.
can't identify. You say there are problems. You can't identify the problems.
There may be some safety problems, but to the best of our knowledge, there have been none identified with our kind of reactor to date.
You haven't been able to identify the problem.
Pardon me?
You have not been able to identify the problem.
We have not been able to identify that there were any problems to date.
Describe the sequence of events leading up to the employment of the ECCS.
Pardon?
Describe the sequence of events leading to the employment of the ECCS.
As I said, the electromatic relief valve went open, depressurized the reactor coolant system to 1,600 pounds. The ECCS then injected through
That
4
was always
points,
their response.
using
Maybe.
makeup pumps, otherwise
We're
known as
pretty
high-pressure
sure
injection.
certain.
Was that automatic?
That was automatic, that's right. And
Most likely.
excuse me?
What threat exists for the general area if those additional leaks that you spoken of earlier are not contained today or tomorrow? What threat exists radiation-wise?
I think no more threat than we've seen over the past 48 hours, which is, in my opinion, very insignificant as
In
we
my
related
opinion,
to
there was
to the
another one.
gentleman here earlier on the levels of exposure possible.
The issue of human error. There have been reports from the NRC that there was some human error involved following the failure of this valve, that somebody turned off the emergency pumping system too soon, allowing the coolant to get into the
I think at this point that's speculation, that there's operator error involved specifically in shutting off the injection system too soon. I don't. Is there operator error involved elsewhere? It may be that after we run our extensive study and analyze very carefully the sequence of events, that there are some things that the operator should have done differently, and hence you could term them as operator errors. That's a possibility.
We certainly won't assume anything. We're going to check every possibility that could have existed.
Sir, why did the fuel fail?
Again, the fuel primarily failed because of the rapid depressurization, the need to shut down our reactor coolant pumps so that we wouldn't damage them and would have them available for subsequent circulation and removal of decay heat. Now, in the process of that depressurization, it's possible there was some steaming in the upper reaches of the core, and then that led to the failure of some of the fuel casings.
Does that mean it was uncovered in the upper reaches of the core?
There's a possibility that occurred. Yes.
What was the maximum cladding temperature?
We don't know the maximum cladding temperature at this point.
How long was the core uncovered?
We're not certain that the degree of time that the core would have been uncovered, but possibly long enough to fail the fuel that we've seen.
That question, how long was it uncovered?
We don't know that.
Mr. Irvine, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has said that this may be the most serious accident to date in a nuclear plant. The nuclear industry for years has been telling us that this kind of accident is highly unlikely or next to impossible. Do you feel that 3 Mile Island was adequately set up to handle this kind of accident?
I think yes, it was, and I think the business has been the nuclear industry has been telling you for years that this kind of an accident certainly is possible. It's possible to have fuel failure. What's not possible is the hypothetical accident that you hear about where the entire core melts and spews molten radioactivity into the area for miles around and kills tens of thousands of people. That's what we've been telling you is not possible. What we've seen here is a fuel failure, something that's possible with an operating reactor today. And nobody's ever said that this couldn't happen. And the safety systems were designed to take care of this kind of an accident, as our safety systems did.
You're saying there's no China syndrome possibility at all, isn't that right?
I'm saying that we don't have any China syndrome possibility with the events that occurred at 3 Mile Island over the past 2 days.
But you're saying also set up. Why did so much radiation get out? And why is it still getting out?
Well, I think we've already quantified that it's not so much radiation that's getting out. I think I've been over that on the levels of radiation that have been released beyond the site boundary.
5% of the normal yearly dosage in one day?
The normal yearly dosage that you get, 200. That's right.
You said we have 5 to 10 and 1 24-hour period?
I said that's possible.
5 to 10% of
That's possible.
Mr. Irvine, did you say there was damage to steam generators?
We think there's a leaking tube in the B steam generator, and as soon as we saw that, we isolated that generator. The B generator is isolated. Pardon? We don't think extensive. I wouldn't guess that maybe 2 or 3 tubes.
Keep it in perspective. You must remember, Mr. Herbine indicated that there might be one or two, several tubes that might be damaged. There are 15,000 tubes, I believe, Jack,
in a single
in each
generator,
steam
yes.
generator.
Would you continue answering the earlier question about what went wrong that you did not anticipate?
Again, a depressurization of the reactor coolant system through an electromatic relief valve that didn't reseat at the appropriate depth.
Hello, Blitz. How's it going? So, you could tell that they're really not sure what was going on at all during this time. So, around 12:15 p.m., Dr. George Wald, a nuclear biologist, he also won... Oops. I pressed the wrong one. There we go. He was a nuclear biologist and was a Nobel Prize winner in 1967, and he had a conference at the Friends Meeting House in Harrisburg, which is, only 10 miles away from the actual power plant itself. And they were going over a bunch of different things and, regarding the 3 Mile incident. And he stated every dose of radiation is considered an overdose. A little of radiation does a little harm, and more does more harm. Ooh, thank you for lurking. I appreciate it. So this caused hundreds, if not thousands, of calls to the governor's office by worried family members and expecting mothers. During this time, the NRC was regulating the situation from their headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the former director of the NRC, his name was Lake H. Barrett, and he states that the job of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC, was to oversee the nuclear power plant industry to ensure that public safety and health was maintained. And at this time, the NRC did not really know much about the situation besides that they were getting radiation levels outside of the 3 Mile Island. And he pretty much stated in the Netflix documentary, The Meltdown 3 Mile Island, that the first day and the second day, this chain was very imperfect communications with very imperfect information to start from, basically left people very much in the dark. So he said it was more so the medias and the government officials and MED. It was all of their faults because they were giving out information that wasn't necessarily 100% true in the aspect of the way that they were using it. And he described the media being a perfect storm of information being misunderstood and misused. So he said that that's what the media was doing. Now, personally, I think the NRC was worried that this could give the nuclear industry a bad reputation and it would no longer be seen as a viable option for energy for the future. And that's why they were stating that everything was going to be fine. They really were more so on the side of pro-nuclear, so they were going to try everything in their power to make sure that things weren't being leaked as well that shouldn't be. So Congress and government officials soon became very agitated on how the incident was being handled and information was being given. So Congress representative named James Weaver, and he was a Democrat out of Oregon, asked NRC how close did the 3 Mile Island disaster come to a core meltdown compared to the China syndrome, and if it could happen. And they responded that they didn't believe it could happen and that they think that they are nowhere close for it to have happened. They explained that the danger to the public was never serious. So, at 10 p.m. on March 29th, 1979, Paul Critchlow received a call from an NRC inspector that he met with the prior day, and he wanted to remain completely anonymous and wanted to inform Paul that things at the plant were much worse than the NRC and MED were making it out to be. He continues stating that they were giving misleading information on what was really going on, and there was much more core damage that could cause consequences for years to come. Now, the government really started to feel like they could not trust the NRC right alongside MED. And of course, the NRC was only concerned with the way people would look at nuclear energy. So the NRC and MED definitely were working alongside each other to make sure that things didn't happen to the nuclear power. So day 3, March 30th, 1979, MED, what the federal NRC and operators stated that inside the facility that they were receiving extremely high readings of radiation. Radioactive gases were still continuing to be released into the atmosphere and into neighboring cities. Scientists from the NRC continued to take samples from air, water, and plants to see how the radiation was affecting the environment around them. And there was an increase of radiation reaching the public and was said to be continuing to go higher with time. So he was claimed that it wasn't a lot. Lake Barrett claims that it wasn't a lot. It was just enough to be concerned about. So at this point, they released that the radiation levels that was detected outside of 3 Mile Island were no higher than a dental x-ray. They were not concerned about evacuating people from the neighboring towns at this time. So, my opinion, I think any amount of radiation should be concerning. This was radiation that was put into our atmosphere by a man-made incident, and regardless, it's not normal. I don't think that they should have just kind of pushed it off like they have been. So the NRC made the decision on whether or not it should be recommended for an evacuation, and they said that Lake Barrett made the decision that 1,200 milligrams per hour would be considered too high, and if the levels got to that point, they would considering evacuating neighboring towns. So, at 8:01 a.m., March 30th, 1979, helicopters started taking readings 130 feet above the stacks, and it was said that the levels as high as 1,200 per hour were detected. Lake explained that he was extremely shocked at this time. He did not think that it was going to get anywhere close near that. At the NRC headquarters, they were discussing if it was really worth evacuating the neighboring cities now, and because they hit that reading level. The reasoning for this discussion is because it takes a lot into evacuating towns, businesses, homes, etc. They were in fear that these places would soon be looted as well. And also, they have to put in consideration of the people that need incubators or life support and stuff like that. So children that are in incubators could possibly die in incidences like this. So government officials were even questioning if it was the right time to evacuate over 1 million people. Of course, Met-Ed's vice president, Jack Herbin, stated that the residents still had nothing to worry about, and they disagreed with the assessments made by the reactor, that the reactor wasn't being controlled. They denied and disagreed with the readings. They were just trying to save the nuclear power industry. So reports were announced that people within a 10-mile radius of the 3 Mile Island had to be put on alert for the possibility of evacuation may be ordered. Emergency response teams were driving around the streets shouting alerts such as stay inside, keep your windows open if you live in a brick home, close your windows. They were definitely stirring the pot because they would go around, one moment they'll say one thing, the next moment they were contradicting themselves. They had absolutely no idea what was going on, and they were stirring the pot, really. Everyone was so afraid. All the residents were so afraid, they weren't sure what was going to happen. So, all of a sudden, a siren started going off outside 3 Mile Island, and it wouldn't stop, and no one had any idea what was going on. The governor got on the phone with the NRC asking if people should start evacuating, and there were disagreements happening at the NRC headquarters on whether or not they should do it. The NRC, the government, and plants officials were literally playing Russian roulette at this point with people's lives. No one had any idea what should happen. So, I'm going to stop our show. This was going to complete part 1. We will be doing part 2 here shortly. I may, depending on things, I may end up doing one additionally this weekend. We'll see how it goes. It all pans out. But I appreciate everyone that stopped in, and I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Also, please remember to make sure you have your little notification button selected under Mystery Girls Inc. so that way you can come and get notified when we have a show happening. Because this is definitely a series that you're not going to want to miss. More information. It was kind of boring in the aspect of not a lot of like crucial information was given today. It gets more interesting. I promise. I promise. I promise. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go raid out. We're going to go raid out to the Game & Watch Bros. Again, I hope everyone has a wonderful Thursday and you have a wonderful weekend. And we will talk to you guys later. Bye now.